Hello, and welcome to another Webster report on this Sunday, the 24th of August 2025. Remember, we're at the end of August, and September's meant to be a big month, according to the people that lead us in this country and other countries. September's going to be a big month, so let's see what September brings. What are we looking at right now? Well, at the moment, what I'm seeing in England is people don't, shall I say, councils and authorities don't want to see Union Jacks and St George's flags. They don't want to see these. But when we go onto mainstream media, it's okay to fly the St George's flag when the the Lionesses in the tournament and we're flying the flags for them. That's okay. But when these flags are being flown against immigration of a certain type, we've got to try and define this, because immigration of people coming into this country who want to come into this country and go, hey, England have got a good set of values. I like those values. I like living in that culture. And those people come over here to integrate into our culture. That's not what we've got. We've got people coming in who are going to change our culture. We've got people who are getting into places of mayorship, of councillors, who are saying that they're going to change the culture of England. We played last week, even Muslim sources saying we can't change this culture of England. It's not right, because those Muslims came to this country because of our culture. They didn't come to bring their culture because they left that culture. People I know personally, yeah, we don't like marrying our 6-year-old children to fully grown men. We moved out of that. We don't like honour killings. We've moved away from that. But now with these people are being thrown in, we've got a government that says, hey, we've deported 5,000 people this year. What about the 30,000 people that you let in, though? So you've deported where's the 25,000? Because now people have been moved out of hotels, like in Epping, that's been won in Supreme Court. So we're moving them out. Where are we pouring them? Where are they going? Where are they going to end up? These are questions that are not racist, not at all, but they are being turned into racism. I posted an article yesterday where people had spent hours in their town hanging St George's and Union Jack flags. And then some bloke in a football top, I think it was an Arsenal top, comes walking down with a set of ladders and starts climbing up and taking these flags down, saying that the Union Jack and particularly St George's Cross are going to be used as symbols of racism. Now, the Union Jack, oh, yeah, they're all racist, they're all English. They didn't the English stop stop slaves, stop racism. We're always going to have this thing, oh, I don't like you because of this, and you don't like me because of that. That's people who can't think. But when people come together and actually talk and think, there's no issues here, unless we've got an ideology that is being pushed by a system and being promoted by what we can only say is that police forces who are bringing in opposition protesters to these protests. And we all know that if we protest, you've applied for something, you're all going there under compliance. So a protest is a legal acceptance and not a rejection. So we've got to get to the point where how do we reject without it being violent? So on that bit of a scenario coming in, Alex, where do you want to pin the tail on the pony?
How do you reject without getting into violence? Right, well, that's an important question. And
isn't it just?
I think the most straightforward way to try and simplify what's going on is, you remember, obviously, when you went to school, there was the study of psychology and the study of sociology. And then maybe if you went to a fairly fancy place or a university afterwards, you might also move into anthropology. So anthropology is kind of similar to sociology in a way. So psychology largely studies the individual. It does branch into social psychology as well, individuals within group settings, but its focus really is, even though you've got mass psychology, which people have spoken about, particularly in COVID, psychologists apply themselves to it. Generally speaking, it looks more at the individual unit with a brain, and then you can ask questions about consciousness and so on, and it can move across into philosophy and the philosophy of mind. What is a mind, and how is the mind related to the brain? Is the brain a part of the body, or is the brain connected to the mind? But generally, it's about the individual, and that would be looked at within psychology. Sociology, obviously, is a study of groups in various configurations, whether they be political, cultural, or whatever. Anthropology, closer to sociology, and looks at groups again, socially and culturally, but also historically. So across cultures, so not just Western, all kinds of cultures, Aboriginal cultures as well, how they're organised. And historically, it connects to archaeology. So we try and reconstruct from anthropology the history of how societies have worked. Now, why am I going through this tedious delineation? Because the main one is between the individual and the group, and they're obviously connected. However, when we talk about useless eaters, but we also talk about useful idiots. And useful idiots are those people within the civil service, some of the professional classes, like, as I've said before, social workers, nurses, occupational therapists, other type people at a civil service type level in the public sector. And a lot of those are being subverted through the universities into sort of a liberal humanist ideology, which is highly individualistic and highly moralistic. So, particularly in the 1960s, you got this type of liberal theology, even Christianity, that kind of said, no matter about skin colour, you cut us, we all bleed red. We all bleed the same. We have a common humanity. And it's very difficult to disagree with that sort of understanding. And then a lot of people cite the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke's Gospel, and they'll try and use that on an individual basis to sort of prescribe a universal humanitarian morality, which must be imposed upon everybody so that things like borders don't exist. And because these useful idiots, unfortunately, have infected a lot of the minds of people, like in social media, they'll come from the same perspective. So they'll just believe in a universal human brotherhood where we're all the same, we all bleed the same colour. There's no distinction between any kind of migrant anywhere and an indigenous person within a country. That's got nothing to do on that model with economics. It's got nothing to do with logistics and infrastructure. It's got nothing to do with water. So if you look at the fact that there's roughly 11 to 12 million more people in this country in the last 25 years consuming, from the same reservoirs, because we haven't built more reservoirs. We've reduced housing stock. So when you have more pressure on the housing stock, and particularly when certain people are prioritised who are not indigenous, the pressure increases, the rents go up, there's more homelessness. And generally, we don't have, logistically speaking, an appropriate infrastructure to maintain the influx. I mean, it could be an influx of, I don't know, let's just say people from Ireland. Let's say if everybody from Ireland just moved into the UK, that would create logistical pressure. It's got nothing to do with skin colour. It's got something to do with culture. But the tension between the incoming culture and the indigenous culture is a wide gap. And particularly if you've got a high trust culture, which you have in northwestern Europe, the Germanic cultures were all high trust cultures, and you bring people in from more low trust cultures, a lot of the East European cultures in particular. So we're not just talking the Islamic aspect, Middle Eastern, ancient Near Eastern. We're talking about East European as well. There'll be cultural practices that are different. So, for example, a lot of East Europeans in landlocked countries believe that, pike and carp and other such fish, which they would eat in Eastern Europe, they're fair game, just go down to the river, take whatever fish you want, which will obviously disrupt our ecosystems. Now, that's only a small example. But most people, and the reason why I have the problem is not because of the politicians, because a lot of people are rebelling. They've got this sort of rump of people who have become liberal humanists in the broadest sense, quote the parable of the Good Samaritan, quote all the things that are clear within, liberal ideology, highly individualistic, highly orientated to psychological units in individuals, and they basically insist on misrepresenting the argument and portraying anybody who wants to do anything about it as obviously less than moral, less than ethical, less than universal. And if a Christian says it as well, they'll quote all the stuff about you need to look after the alien and the stranger, and of course you do. But those circumstances are completely different than what we're talking about in this situation. So people, unfortunately, are quoting from sources and using universal moralistic principles and ideas without much understanding, really, of how it all works. And then they're parroting other people. They get highly moralistic. They start virtue signaling. But unfortunately, because a lot of these people, as you saw with, Black Lives Matter, a lot of the people who were defending Black Lives Matter were white middle-class American women. So this is the problem that you get time and time again. You get a bunch of people who are completely detached from reality, who've bought into like a coma state and do not read the situation properly. So no matter what you say to them, they'll just throw the racism card. They'll never listen to anything that you say until they're affected. So yeah, ultimately it's going to be very difficult until we've actually been able to impact very, very powerfully those people who are currently asleep. And it's not going to be the political class. And if we don't get those on side, who really should be a bit more awake, it's going to create a lot more tension about bloodshed, because obviously the police are, in certain instances, seemingly supporting people from the opposite position to come in to try and create friction. So even the police are being mobilised to defend the status quo. It just becomes very messy. If more of the people actually align, and the flags, of course, are very dangerous to them, because the flags are a real statement. And I was in a debate earlier today with a few people who are basically they're just stupid. And they were talking about the erosion of British cultural traditions, and some, wisecracker came out, well, what British cultural traditions have we lost? And I tried to say it's not about specifically what we've lost. It's about everything that's coming in. And those traditions are being prioritised. And it is starting to have an impact now in terms of Christian preachers being arrested. So It is having an impact on our culture, but they just insist on saying, oh, what British cultural traditions have been eroded. And then they try and get you to prove which certain British cultural traditions have been eroded. And it just isn't as simple as that. But they're bringing you back to their script all the time of liberal humanism, where everybody's equal, borders don't matter, we all bleed the same colour. Until that type of stupid thinking is eradicated. And because it resembles superficially God is love and the Christian message, and you should welcome the alien and the orphan and those with distress. Yes, of course, but that's a fundamental misapplication of Scripture to a problem at a different level.
Yeah, you're spot on with the summation, mate. But we're now in a position where people who can't articulate what's going on, people who don't actually understand everything that's going on, just like the people who don't want to pay for the bills, but they don't understand actually why they shouldn't be paying those bills. They just know there's something wrong, so they get agitated, and that agitation is whipped up a little bit, and then all of a sudden you do get the fundamentalists, the idiots that fall out at the front, the ones who talk about Muslimic fundamentalists, things like that, people who don't understand. This is where the mainstream will go and interview those people, and not the people who've got any articulation. They have got an issue that there are and I put in speech marks, mainstream medias that are seeing this that's being played. But as we know from the last 20 years, Alex, we see truth come out on many occasions. We've seen truth being spilled out everywhere. But it's then co-opted. People go in and say, I know what we can do, and it's normally a high-profile truther or whatever that gets into that position. I don't think we can get into this position now, because if you as an individual are a critical thinker and you can go and see this and work this stuff out for yourself, then you don't need somebody to follow. But you actually still don't know what you can do. You know, I see a lot of this at the moment where we're going to have an inquiry into these rape gangs. Inquiry. An inquiry is not good enough. We need an investigation. And we don't need protests, we need rejection. So, how do we do this? Because when we turn up to these protests, we can see that agitators are being brought in to agitate, funnily enough. And then the protesters start arguing with the other protesters, and it gets a little bit shirty, and the police come in and arrest a few people. Job done. The protest was legal. Everybody had applied for it. You're protesting, so you fall under all this legislation that applies to protests and the rules, and that's why you're being strip searched and being put into a cell. Now, is that good enough? Is that good enough for what we're facing? I don't believe it's good enough. But how do we start joining the dots for these other people who are just waking up? I mean, what you're talking about is you're talking about Martin Niemöller before Martin has even thought, hey, there's something going on here. So we're in this position now where we can see, hey, that's happening, but it's not happening to me yet. So if it's not happening to me yet, then we've still got a bit more time, Alex. So if we've got a bit more time, then, you know, we could vote. We could do this. We could do that. We could do everything that they want us to do by blocking us off, by our own admission, if that makes sense. We can't do that because they take it as a legal process. So what do? Well, we've got Doncaster Council asking for people to come forward and say, can you tell us who's cut these cameras down? We've only had them up 2 days and somebody's cut them down. Will somebody come and tell us? Now, if somebody goes and tells them, they're already winning, Alex. So we can see everything that's happened in history is happening now. How do we divert people from following the same path, or can we?
Yeah. Well, it's a tough one, mate. Okay, so there's a word. It's a fancy word that people will have heard of, pedagogy, which is all about education, really. Not education in the classic school sense. Schooling is not the same as education, although most people confuse the two. But pedagogy is the whole art of bringing real, meaningful education that's potentially transformative to individual learners. So when Tony Blair said education, he really meant indoctrination. But he used the words education. So it's pedagogical. It's a pedagogical problem. But then it's deeper than that, because you've got to look at the nature of social change historically and how it happens. So if you look at experiments in planned social order, particularly communism, and you can do the same with missionary church planting. You know, obviously Christians believe in the unction of the Spirit of God, but a lot of churches just step out with evangelistic programs which make reference to the gospel in Matthew 28:19 and 20, the Great Commission, but they operate in very worldly terms, running campaigns in very worldly terms. So you can have a planned social order where people attempt, using ideological apparatus, and there can be doctrines of any type, to impose a set of theoretical frameworks upon people who don't currently believe in those frameworks. And then what that becomes, it becomes a conflict around values, beliefs, ideas, which tends to lead to disputes. And this leads to the classic atheist line where they critique religion, which we would as well, but then they use it to say everything that is in any way spiritual or talking about God is religious and leads to conflict and leads to war. This leads to a lot of atheist ideas about getting rid of religion. But the problem is much deeper. It's not the fact that it's religious or pigeonhole that way. It's about the fact that it's a carefully planned social order which is administered from above by a human being. So it's a bit like a theocracy. Islam talks about a theocracy, but really what that is, it's a caliphate with a bunch of people at the top who are still human, advocating for a theocracy, but it's not divine rule. It's humans preaching that that particular set of beliefs about God is correct and imposing them on everybody else. That's a planned social order. You got it in communism as well. We know the results of communism. Planned social orders don't tend to go very well, even well-intentioned ones, because you're violating human nature. The Christian message is all about free will and voluntary acceptance of a message. We don't just voluntarily respond to the message because somebody preached. Sometimes people voluntarily respond to the message because they were moved by the compassion of the Christian who engaged in social kind of justice activities and helping the poor, feeding them, like Jesus said. So there's many ways that the gospel can get out there other than strict preaching. So there's always a downside to that in the world we're living in, because it resurrects this whole conflict around ideas and disagreements, and then people say, well, why do I believe your position? What's your source? These are my sources. So notoriously the alternative, well, I say notoriously, it's not really, it shouldn't really be that complicated, called spontaneous social order. And there's a philosopher in the early 1970s called Michael Polanyi who talked about this in the face of spontaneous orders, in the face of these sort of planned social orders. And what he basically said is, if you look at what happened specifically in Ireland with terrorism, in the end, people get sick of the bloodshed. There's a specific moment that comes when enough people just say, we've had enough. And miraculously, many of them seem to reach a similar point at a similar time. When that happens, without anybody planning it, there tends to be a shift. Now, that isn't micromanaged, it isn't planned, it's got nothing about specific protests being successful. Realistically, spontaneous social orders are ones that are not controlled by any faction, by any human, no matter how true the message appears to be. So in a sense, we can see that as Christian, from a Christian perspective, as when God's Spirit moves upon people's hearts. But you can also get it just in terms of revulsion against bloodshed. People say enough is enough. So realistically, I don't think there's much prospect of any sort of planned social order working, because it tends to jut up against counter positions and turns it into an ideological battlefield, and that just makes it easy for the government to start polarizing us. So I think what will happen is, like you see with these St. George flags, who specifically organised this was the one person who said to everybody on Facebook,
exactly.
We don't know how it happened. It's just everyone seemed to get to the critical point at a similar time. So it's very hard to predict.
Is it the 100th monkey syndrome?
Yeah, well, that's essentially, that's the short-term version.
See, the way I see this, Alex, I've throughout my life, I've heard people about, oh, they protest this and they protest that. They don't like the government doing this. They don't like the government doing that. But I've never seen a government acting so beyond the remit. They are actually acting as if we work for them. And I did have a bit of a debate, as you well know, with one of our friends recently, where it doesn't matter. It doesn't need these bloodlines. It doesn't need these connections to join these nations, because international politics venerate this themselves. But that's the problem. Because international politics venerate this themselves, then we choose to miss the intricate details. And I have been pointed at saying, well, you're just looking at details that don't matter. You know, we looked at the Hillel Ben Shakar stuff. That does matter. It might be an intricate nothingness to people, but I don't believe it is. And we've discussed that, how that could play out in a courtroom drama. We could say, oh, it's not going to be a courtroom. Well, we're going to a judgment. So I know that the Bible and the law is law. So when we study law and we see what law that the nations are being brought under, which is commercial. So it's all the Mr., Miss, Mrs. It's all the surname stuff. Now, that surname, that pretend, has got to be represented by something real. They're pretending that the real doesn't exist, they're lost. Even though the real stood in front of them saying, excuse me, excuse me. So we've got to be able to take control of this and then bring a remedy forward. Now, we've had this debate so many times. I got gifted the remedy. I was gifted the remedy. We've had Richard on here so many times. He's doing stuff on his own channel where he's interacting with these people and signing his own bills. So he's not using what I had. I didn't need to do what Richard's doing, but Richard's still proving the point that we're creditors. You can't be doing this to us. So it has to get to a point where there's a fulcrum and people say, right, I've had enough. Are they going to be able to bring enough contradiction and fight between the people that are here, that we all submit to this economic system? It doesn't matter what colour you are, what country you're from, what creed, what religion, we're all in this same bills of exchange, debt economy. If you're a creditor, you've got to act differently. It doesn't matter what colour you are, doesn't matter what church you go to. It's a different type of thing. How do we get this across to people who are fighting for lives? Because, you know, at the end of the street, they've got multiple immigrants, they've got people who have challenged or attacked children in these areas, and their excuse is, well, we don't know, it's not against our culture. So they need re-educating, they don't need jail. We've got all this integration. Well, this is what has always happened throughout history, how we change societies. Is the society that we're in, is it going to be changed into this, Alex? Or do you think that people are going to be able to, because I do see a lot of people who can articulate it, who are going down the right paths. Which one do you think is going to win that race?
Well, the problem is you can't change society. It sounds like a simple thing, but society, whatever it is something that exists at a scale way beyond. It's such an abstraction. We use the word society, but the reality is you're a part, I'm a part, everyone in the chat's a part, save British English society. What does that mean? It doesn't actually mean anything. So it's just a loose term. So we've got communities, we've got neighbourhoods, we've got individuals within the nation. And the problem is when we talk about society in abstract terms or even changing it, we disempower ourselves because you can't. If you're political, if from very young you get involved in grassroots politics, after 20 or 30 years, if you've climbed enough greasy poles, they've vetted you every step of the way, then you could potentially have some so-called political clout and influence in the echelons and corridors of power, but you'll be completely declawed because they've already vetted you. So you are not going to change society even through on a policy level. It's not going to happen. So the only thing we can do is to empower people to become active in their local communities to be the best human being that they possibly can. Now, from our Christian perspective, that means to be a born-again believer. John 10 said, I've come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. A walk with God. Because if Christians were still able to do that at the individual level, and enough of them were to come together and be faithful to the word of God,
we
then
won't
there would
be
be a counterculture. Yeah, we won't be.
I'm saying we wouldn't be in this position if we could get to.
There'd be a counterculture which actually had some power and would be akin to a spontaneous social order. Nobody would have to plan anything. Call it the vibrational level if you want to conceive it in terms of energy for our new age friends who get on that particular track. See it as a tuning fork vibrating at particular frequency. Consider that to be correlated to God's holy standards, his design and order for society's governance order. If we were operating at that frequency and living like that, if we valued marriage as a cultural institution, we can see, quite apart from political actions in the world, marriage is absolutely not valued whatsoever. Sexual infidelity is, and it's just commonplace and normal. So the very foundations of a moral, spiritual, social, and cultural life, it's not just about corrupt leaders. We've got to take our share of the blame for the way we've chosen to live, the decisions we've made, the commitments we have or haven't made. And until individuals start to turn that around and plan, first of all, to turn their individual life around. In the Bible, repentance is the Greek word metanoia, and metanoia means a change of mind. So you've got to change your mind first. You want to travel in a different direction. That's not going to be enough because your mind is corrupted and polluted. But you start there. You're weak-willed. You've got a mind that's capable of double crossing itself, but you've got to start with that conviction to change your mind. You need the Spirit of God then to change your heart, and you need to be renewed, which Christians believe generally, if they're biblical, that means being born again. So you can see that Jesus was the second Adam. He was the image of the invisible God. We are made in the image of God. So he's the new template from which the new humanity comes. So if people align and are regenerate as individuals within communities and living to a standard that's biblical, then the divine governance order will have a better chance, and its good fruits will have a better chance of being a countercultural influence, which Jesus talked about as salt and light in the world. When you lose that, if salt's no good anymore, like Jesus said, it's to be thrown underfoot and trampled. So it is an individual problem, and individual hearts and minds need to be changed, and if enough do, then we'll get some traction. But any sort of planned attempt to turn this around, for me, it's hopeless. But we don't want the spontaneous order to be a violent one, because if it's an overspill of violence and frustration, that's not going to end well.
But the violence is what they want. They can cope with that. They're ready to manoeuvre and manufacture something from violence. It's like Martin Redding said earlier about Maggie. Maggie said, Maggie Thatcher, none of this would be happening under Maggie Thatcher unless Maggie Thatcher was in charge now and her handlers were saying, this is what we want. But when you get Maggie Thatcher who stole me milk, she did all these things, my parents hated her because they were Labour supporters, because Labour's for the working man. So all of that was, dare I say, normal argument. We're not in normal arguments anymore. It doesn't matter who we vote in. Everybody can see. Regular voters can see. Wow, I voted for Labour and look what they've done. Andy Burnham round here decimated this place. But he left and became Mayor of Manchester. We've now got Joe Platt. Wigan have got Lisa Nandy. These are no marks. There's nothing about them. There's nothing going to change anything. They're going to go rah, 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 and go along with everything that is being spoken. So what have we got the alternative? Well, it's reform, isn't it? Obviously. Reform is taking all these things. Why? Because they're going to deal with this immigration thing that is being allowed and exasperated. We mentioned last week the French Navy bring them halfway over the channel. Then our border patrol that our king says we don't need because we don't have borders, pick those migrants up and bring them to Dover. And then we gift the dinghy and the life jackets back to the French, ready for the next load to come over. So if that is happening, and then they're being put in hotels where the hotels are now being protested, so we've now got HMOs. We've got a local thing round here near me, a pub that's been shut ages, being touted as being put in illegal immigrants in. It's already been spray painted that it's going to be HMO. People don't want it. people don't like it. The problem that we've got is that the people that are in control of our councils are going, have that. You're having some of that. And what are you going to do about it? Oh, you're going to kick off? Brilliant. Thanks for that. We'll now manoeuvre to the next phase. How do you grab hold of these people who are being manipulated like that, show them the truth, and then get them to organise and articulate things better? That's where I feel that we're stuck, Alex.
Yeah, but I don't think that's going to work. I think in theory, if people were capable of doing that in a sustained way, maybe you would get some traction. But for me, I think we're on the icy slope, like the toboggan run, and the toboggan set off, and it's going to end up careering down at 80 plus miles an hour until it gets to the bottom, and we'll see what happens. Because for me, there's no pulling back from the brink.
That means that you're still stood at the top or halfway down, shouting at people saying, "This is what's going to happen," and they're going, "What?"
Yeah, essentially. But I mean, if people want to have an adaptive response, it's very difficult to know. I mean, a few years ago, I looked at Uruguay in South America as a place to potentially emigrate to. I know quite a few people who were savvy and switched on, who were looking at leaving. Potentially Poland, places like this. It may get to the point where the shrewd person leaves themselves because it's not looking too good over here.
No, it's looking the worst I've ever seen it in my lifetime. To see that socialism is being promoted as a remedy, and we know where this ends up, and we see the Marxist point of views that are already there. We see the Marxism even in the church. So we're seeing a lot of attacks over in this country. But do you know what? We get these attacks after America is already under attack. Now we see Trump is starting to deal with this. So at this point, Russ, I'd like to bring you in because you've seen all this them against us stuff being promoted, and you've seen it fall to bits. You've seen real people opening fire with guns, being, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, where two people attacked him. He defended himself. They wanted to prosecute him, and he ended up being exonerated from it because of the video footage that they had. But that was still attempted to be twisted by these mainstream media that are trying to portray an ideology about people. So we've seen a story that's been portrayed over in America. That story is now being challenged, and people are writing a different story. But we're still getting the latest acts. We haven't converted to that. So at this point, Russ, I know you're going to bring in scripture, which is what we welcome, but these arguments that are going on, what do you see, and how do you approach it? Because you're obviously evangelizing to these people, and a lot of them are on the same page as us. They just don't know. They just don't know how. They don't know how to articulate. It's very strange. So, what at this point, Ross? What's your input on this?
Well, seeing that I'm an American and all that, I have a very different outlook on things, especially from like your leaders and stuff over there. I would follow the lines of Trump. Britain needs a big, beautiful wall. I mean, you guys have a border. You guys need to enforce it, and the reason so is for national security and security.
But our king, Russ, our king, what's his name? King Charles says that we haven't got borders. We haven't got any borders. So if we haven't got borders, we don't need border patrol that is picking these migrants up halfway and bringing them back. So we don't need them to do that. So how do we then go, hey, look at what's going on? Because you know what I'm saying here.
Yeah, well, you remember back in the olden times in antiquity and even before then, there were big cities, and then there was a lot of space in between those cities. Um, and in between those cities were places of no borders, and that's where a lot of crime and violence and bad things happened, which was why people flocked to those cities with those big walls, like Jerusalem, like Babylon, Assyria, and different regions. That's why kingdoms, even in Europe, that's why you have castles with big walls, is because those provide security from the outside. And the liberal idea that everybody is just inherently good is inherently flawed. There is none perfect. There are no good people out here in this world. So you do need those borders. You do need to protect yourself, your communities, because if you just let anybody in unvetted, you don't know who they are, then you're just creating a situation where you're going to have big problems. Like right now, you guys are dealing with rape gangs and stuff, and violence towards children, and just pedestrians walking down the street. We experienced some of the same things here. And I think what really saved us was getting President Trump into office, because he's literally pushing that nationalist ideology that, we need strong, safe communities, and we need to know who's coming in here. And it's just a matter of just basic national security, because there's enemies of Britain, obviously. There's enemies of America. Everybody has enemies. And if you're just letting people in without checking them out, then you could be letting the wrong people in, and they could do some serious damage. So
Well, hang on. Well, I think me and Alex have got to stop you here, Ross, because you seem to be applying common sense here, and that doesn't seem to work in this world. So
well, yeah, common
you're
sense is
how
a
dare you? How dare you? You dirty, dirty get! How dare you apply
well, even
common
though,
sense?
like, and a
This
lot
is
of
what
people
we
would
always
appeal and say,
accepted.
well,
Exactly, exactly.
and a lot of people would say, well, Russ, you're a Christian, shouldn't you be a little different about these kinds of things? And no, because if we go to Jude 1, Jude comes out swinging in this epistle. By the way, this is like literally one of the first apologetic works in Christian history. Verse 4, he says, "For there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this commission, ungodly men, turning the grace of God into lasciviousness, and denying uh, the only Lord God, and our Lord Jesus Christ. I will put you in remembrance, though ye once knew this, how that the Lord, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, after destroyed them that believed not." So what Jude does is he calls out these false teachers who had crept into the church, and he's putting them on blast. And that's this whole epistle. He goes through, he's using their own scriptures against them to prove that they're snakes and all kinds of stuff. But we have a defense mechanism here in the early church that keeps the wolves out. So the church itself had borders, and the borders weren't literal physical borders. The borders were the apostolic witness, the apostles, and the ones who came after the apostles who fought against these heresies. So yeah, as a Christian, I say, yeah, we do need borders. We do need to protect ourselves. We've got to keep the unsavory people out of our communities, because as soon as they come in, remember, a little leaven leavens the whole loaf. So as soon as bad things start happening, it grows and it just continues to spread. So you guys really, really got to get on the ball with some border security, or you're going to have some major issues. As my cousin John Witherspoon said in regards to society, but what kind of society will we have if our responsibilities are set by man and not by God? So what the left does is they have removed God. They have separated themselves from God. They're atheistic, and they think that they can rule themselves. Well, guess what? No nation can rule itself. No man can rule over himself without falling into desolation. And we see this throughout the history of the biblical canon with every Gentile nation that rose up against Israel. They tried to rule themselves, and what happened? They all fell. Babylon fell, the Assyrian Empire fell, Rome fell, Greece fell, all of them fell. The Philistines fell. Egypt even fell multiple times. I mean, we can go to Egypt right now and see how many times they fell. But yeah, we've got to make sure that we're centering God as the head of not only ourselves, the church, but also the state as well. Um, And one thing that they try to say is, well, this is good for our safety. We're gonna push the Christians into a corner. You can't preach in the streets. You can't pray in the streets. Don't show your Bibles, stuff like that. It's just for your safety. Well, you know what? Benjamin Franklin also said those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. So
Yeah.
you don't give up your freedoms just for a little bit of safety, but you do got to make sure that your nation is safe and secure. Otherwise, it's just going to be a wasteland, lawless wasteland.
I'm into that, brother. I'm into that. Our American correspondent, Uni Blacksister.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
Has your mum just turned your Wi-Fi on, mate?
No. I was busy doing something.
Oh, hey, listen, just leave it there. I don't want to know.
No, not like what you think.
Listen, you don't know what I think. I just don't want to know what you've been doing. All right.
Okay.
Listen, so what have you got for us, and how's it going to fit in? Because you've obviously not listened to any of the conversation that we've had. But over in England at the moment, they are fighting about flags. They want the English flag up everywhere. That's been taken down by our local authorities as it's incitement to racism and to rioting and to disorder. Now, you've already seen that over there in America. They're the same factions, they're just being funded under different names. So, what have you? We're seeing this being expanded in our country. I mean, we're being flooded to the point of drowning here, Taylor, at the moment in England.
Well,
so, what? How can you join the stuff that we're talking about?
Well, first of all, what I'll say is that I don't know everything that's going on in the UK, but I will say this though, is that I've come to learn that the bigger the names and the harder that they push this far left and Trump deranged narrative, the more likely they are to the more obvious they are that they're just actors. Because as you know, in decades past, the hardcore left, they would never be so stupid as to be openly communistic, because that's just a huge turnoff for any sane person, even if they are of the liberal-minded variety. And so when you have these far left groups like these BLM types, these Antifa types, going around and being crazy and doing nonsensical stuff, like you said, replacing flags, and or you even have the state doing that. That's more to show, and it's pretty clear at this point that it's made to show just how bad the far left regime really is, and it puts them out in the open and shows everyone in the world, not just in the UK, but everyone in the world, because of how globalized society has become. Is seeing just how deranged and nonsensical and cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs land some of these countries are, especially in Western Europe. Now, obviously, we've got that here in the US as well, and especially up in Canada. But the thing is that whatever country you mention, it's still the same. You have these politicians or their stand-ins, either or, who are pushing these agendas that are so nonsensical and so obviously against common sense and against what the people want, that what it does is it pushes their numbers into the absolute pits, just like what's happened here in America with the Democrat Party, where where their approval rating, especially in the younger generation, the Gen Z crowd, is extremely low. Like right now, they're heading down to the tens in terms of percentage approval ratings, and soon they're even heading down into the single digits. And that is perfect seeding for the absolute demolishment and disbandment of the Democrat Party as a whole.
Is that your generation, Taylor?
No, my generation is millennials.
You're a millennial, are you?
Yeah, I was born in 1994.
Well, the
19.
Democrats, what they
You
did
go
was they
on.
showed their hand way too early, right around COVID and in the wake of COVID. See, they weren't always openly communistic, but if you look at like Barack Obama, Hillary, and Bill Clinton, you start looking back in time, you start
Yeah.
seeing that they were covertly communist. They
Yeah.
thought they had it on lock during COVID. They was able to lock us down. They was able to keep us in our houses. They was able to make us do all kinds of weird social experiment stuff, like wearing face diapers, and staying 10 feet apart. Like, here's the logic. You have to wear a mask to walk into the restaurant, but as soon as you sit down at the table and go to eat, you can take your mask off now, because somehow the virus just magically doesn't affect you when you're sitting down at a table.
Or you can't be outside past 7:00 because that's when the mask that's when the virus comes out. You can't.
It was
Yeah, the
actually,
virus-
it was actually
virus
10
is a great
p.m.
stalker.
It
But
was 10 p.m. over here.
So they thought they had society in their pocket, that they could just flagrantly be communists, and they found out wrong. It didn't really work out to their advantage, because we noticed, like, during the COVID lockdowns, we were told here in Michigan, I think it was like 3 weeks to flatten the curve. Like right at the beginning, 3 weeks. We're going to do a lockdown for 3 weeks. Well, 3 weeks turned into 3 months. 3 months turned into over a year and a half. And by then we were done with it, because like, you can't just keep telling us, oh, this is just temporary, and keep going. What really like made them stop doing the whole lockdown thing, the social distancing and the masks, isn't it because they just decided by science, hey, this is something that we're just going to stop doing? No, it's because people just stopped doing it, and you can't enforce it. Because what they figured out is when hundreds of thousands and millions of people just all at once say, you know what, no, we're not doing this anymore. Well, you don't really have a way to enforce it other than violence. And over here in America, you can't really do that on the American people, because we have more guns than citizens. For every American citizen, there is 3 to 4 guns, and that's just the registered ones. So you can't really just overthrow us with violence, because we bark back. So they played their hand way too soon. They showed their true communist colors, and now their numbers are in the dumps, because everybody's finding out that everything that Trump did from 2016 to 2020 was on the money, and that he was just being dog-tragged by the mainstream media that's controlled by the left through USAID. So
you're partly right, and I say partly because you are right in what you said, but there's more to it, and with the fact that see, the thing is that the other reason as to why the COVID lockdowns ended so relatively soon was because of Operation Warp Speed. People like to harp on Operation Warp Speed, saying, "Oh, Trump made us take the job." But no, that's not it. That's not at all what happened. Operation Warp Speed broke the blockade, because, as you know, they were planning to see when they rolled out COVID in 2020. One of the main reasons they did it when they did it was to get rid of Trump. It was an election year. They wanted to tank his numbers and then get in the mail-in ballots, and then be able to tank the economy and get back to what they were doing, because they were planning to initiate COVID under Hillary. The original plan was to do the Bill Gates vaccine and the 5-year lockdowns that they kept on talking about, and Hillary's little fun camps that she would brag about, saying if people who don't want to obey will get sent to fun camps. That was the original.
Which Taylor, let me interject, was what New Zealand were doing. So if Hillary had been in, you'd have been going through what New Zealand, what Jacinda Ardern was doing down there.
I have no idea what happened in New Zealand, to be honest, so I can't say for certain. But
yeah,
I
they
know
were
Well,
locking people up for not taking the jab.
she said, Taylor, that if you don't take your test, meaning test, if you don't take your test, you'll go into this camp for 14 days. After 14 days, if you don't take the test, you'll be kept for another 14 days. So now you can see, because she said this, if you don't take your test, you'll stay there. That's what would have happened under Hillary.
Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, absolutely. We would have had, because Bill Gates kept talking about the five, how it would take 5 years for the job, and then it would be mandatory. And also, it would, they would initiate their Georgia Guidestones with killing off a large amount of people with that. Of course, they would have also had the climate change agenda would have went into full force. The Paris climate accords. They would have initiated World War III with China and Russia, et cetera, et cetera. So we'd probably all be dead right now. So for anyone who, we have to thank Trump and by extension, really the military for really saving us from what was originally planned to happen, which was the 16-year plan that Q outlined many times. That was 8 years of Obama setting everything up for Hillary to activate and pull the switch in order to finalize and complete the New World Order. But as far as what's going on now, going back to what you said, Ross, about people didn't that people stopped caring or stopped going along with it. There's been many many times throughout the last 100 years or so where they've tried pushing a little too hard, but then they pull it back when they realize it's not going to work. Like, for example, let's take 1994 or 1993, I think, when Clinton first got into office. Hillary, because she was the co-president, she was trying to push something called Hillary Care, which would have completely socialized medicine. I'm sure you know what Hillary Care is, right, Ross?
Hillary Care.
Wow. Yeah. Some Obamacare. Obamacare was the blueprint for it or something.
Yeah, so basically, Hillary Care was the full socialization of medicine, and it didn't work out because even the left at the time, back in the 90s, even as recent as the 90s, they weren't having this. This was too much, and so it got pushed back. The plan was, you see, Obama didn't make that same mistake when he initiated Obamacare. It wasn't onto the near level of Hillary Care, and the whole purpose, as you said, for Obamacare was for, as I said before, this is the 16-year plan. He puts the stuff there, and then she activates it. So she was going to bring in her Hillary Care, and then say, "Oh, you see, we should have just done this back in '93 when I first proposed this." Create the situation artificially, and then you give them the answer to the situation that you created and that you intentionally created. So
that's a Hegelian dialectic, Taylor. They've done it for a long time.
Yep, but yeah, that's just one example of things they've done, and because Clinton was pushing way too hard in his first year, but because of Oklahoma, it saved his career, and he had to moderate for his second term, relatively speaking, at least. But
how strange is it though, Taylor, when you say the fact that Oklahoma saved Clinton, right? Yet we know that it wasn't just a bomb in a truck outside. We know there was explosives in the Murrah building. We know all this. So the fact that saved Clinton, it should draw attention, because I'll tell you what, over here it drew attention. People who I knew were looking, saying that doesn't make sense.
They were.
We never got anywhere with it, but that's what I'm saying.
People were saying that back then?
Say again.
People were saying that back then? People you knew were calling it out on day one, back in 95?
Well, 95, I would say, I didn't get on the internet proper till 98, 99. But 98, 99, people were already in blogs, or what did they used to call them? Bit like, the AOL chat rooms, the very old ones on the dial-up modems. People were already going, this looks terrible. Well, as soon as you go into that, they raise questions. Well, I take those questions and I go and have a look, and the questions can't be answered by mainstream media. They obfuscate, they go all around them. And I've seen this from JFK. I've seen it through all of them. Even the likes of John Lennon's in speech marks assassination. All this stuff I've seen, and I've got to believe to be true. But it doesn't look it. Well, that's just because you're a knobhead. Well, that doesn't quite sit right anymore because there's a lot of knobheads that are saying a lot of stupid things. And we've got to have the balls, like we are doing, to be able to bring this to the table and say, look at the balls on this table, look at all this bollocks, let's sort through it. That's what we've got to do.
Well, yeah,
So,
there's no.
so yeah, the answer to your question was yes, people are asking these questions 90s. They knew after the World Trade Center, they knew there was something not right, but we were still building on this Islam thing. And when we see our
93
own,
Trade Center or 9/11? Which one?
no, the original bombing in 91,
93.
93. So the original bombing that was set up by the FBI, you know, you've got the fellow saying, hey, I was told to do this. Oh, let's forget about that. Why are we forgetting about it? Well, it didn't work. Okay. Oh, look, the Murrah building's blown up. Oh, no. Look at Timothy McVeigh. Oh, naughty man. Yeah, but where's all his background? Who's this fella that was with him? Oh, no, he wasn't there. Well, these sources say he was. These eyewitnesses say this. And all of a sudden, we had to just forget about all that and believe. Then when 9/11 happened, Taylor, it was like, go on. What I remember watching it live, and I thought this looks like a movie. And then what was being portrayed wasn't what I'd seen. I don't see buildings disintegrate. I don't see buildings that haven't been hit by anything collapse from the bottom down, up, I should say, because the when we get to World Trade Center 7, the roof kinked and it dropped systematically all in one. And you think, that's not right. Fires don't do that. Fires don't set fire to all the particular constructs of the pillars and take everything out simultaneously. No, it doesn't happen. It's not common sense. So I saw all that then. Other people must see it as well, Taylor. It's just that they've never been able to organise and come together. And I think that's what the biggest problem is for a lot of us. We can all see this, but we don't know how to come together because we all believe in something, but they don't believe in everything. Whereas I can't believe in something and not check out everything else. Because if I'm not checking everything else, I'm missing something. And I think, to be fair, that's the flea that I put in your ear every week is, yeah, you've got some great information here, but look at the bigger picture. And I think that's what I'm pointing at. I'll bring your stuff in now there, mate.
Okay. All right. So, well, one thing I'll say before I start this is about the one more thing about Oklahoma City. So not only did it save Clinton's career because they were already going to kick him out in 90. They were getting ready to kick him out in 96, but they got like I said, I've said it before. They got a twofer out of it. They blamed it on Timothy McVeigh, and they said it was a far right extremist. And they said that he was that he did it for Waco, in response to Waco, because it was on the anniversary of the Waco incident, 2-year anniversary. So then they could blame the militia movement on top of it. The pro-gun owners and the people who were coming out against the hypocrisy and the communism of the far left and of the Clintons, which of course Waco, of course, was also Clinton. That was Hillary's job. She ordered that one. That satanic evil witch. But regardless, I just wanted to throw that in there because with these events that they can get multiple things out of them. But this, I feel like, is big right here. And that's why I'm actually thinking that this last week has also been really interesting because this is a big thing for not only the culture, but also for history revisionism as well. And so I'll go ahead and start with this. The Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. New York Times, Trump says Smithsonian focuses too much on how bad slavery was. The remark, made as the president has ordered a wide-ranging review of museum exhibits, added to his pattern of minimizing Black history.
And before I start reading any further, I'll just say we have people like Joy Reid of CNN, or Christianity, either or, who are pushing back super hard against this. You know, she's supposed to be this this discussion moderator on a CNN panel show, but then she came out hardcore against this idea, which further shows again just how diluted the left actually is. But and she's not the only one. There's so many others. So moving on. Having visited many years ago several of the DC mall museums which constitute the Smithsonian network, both the good and the bad of our National Museum were known to the editor/publisher of the Anti-New York Times. But goodness gracious, I never knew about some of the more recent add-ons just discovered as a result of a deeper dive prompted by the subject matter of this article. One of the cultural Marxist/Frankfurt School museums is particularly repugnant, specifically the National Museum of African American History and Culture, founded under the reign of Bush the Younger in 2003 and relocated by Bathhouse Berry, that's Obama, to a much larger and much uglier building in 2016. The dump, nicknamed the Blacksonian, serves the dual purpose of inciting blacks and guilt-shaming whites who set foot in it. Yes? Hold on a second.
What are you doing? Is his mum shouting at him? I think his mum might be shouting at him. He must have got too loud on his soapbox. But yeah, picking up on that. Oh, you're back. What's happening?
She wasn't yelling at me. She had a delivery for me. She delivered some of my clothes.
Oh, are they cheese butties? Are they cheese sandwiches?
No, clothes.
All right, I'm glad.
Ah, boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. But continuing. So, the Blacksonian serves the dual purpose of inciting blacks and guilt-shaming whites who set foot in it. And that is why Commander Trump and the Q operation are targeting this filth. From the article, quote, President Trump accused the Smithsonian Institution of focusing too much on quote-unquote how bad slavery was and not enough on the brightness of America as his administration conducts a wide-ranging review of the content in its museum exhibits. The Smithsonian is out of control, where everything discussed is how horrible our country is, how bad slavery was, and how unaccomplished the downtrodden have been. Nothing about success, nothing about brightness, nothing about the future, Mr. Trump said in a social media post, end quote. And here's the kicker. Quote, Mr. Trump added in the social media post that he had instructed his lawyers to go through the museums and start the exact same process that has been done with colleges and universities. End quote. Winning. Let's have a look at some of the incendiary and disproportionate negativity being force-fed to countless school kids on field trips, as well as the deluded and simple-minded adults who pay to be incited or shamed over a historical evil that has, at least one time or another, oppressed selected people of every race, including millions of white Europeans kidnapped and enslaved by Mongols, Huns, Turks, Arabs, North Africans, and Jewish Bolsheviks, not just blacks. Slavery, 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 wow, 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 shaming and blaming white Americans with their own tax dollars. Denigrating Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence because he was a plantation owner who wanted to end slavery. Images of slaves being whipped, the Black Olympic protesters of 1968. Maybe it's time for yours truly to do a book on the shocking untold story of white slavery throughout the centuries. Exactly. In addition to the federal funding that got this Marxist monstrosity off the ground, and apart from some big-name black celebrities, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Magic Johnson, Oprah Winfrey, etc., there were some mighty big individual and organizational donors. It comes as no surprise that some of the usual suspects behind so much other nasty political and geopolitical business had a hand in promoting this demoralizing, over-the-top, anti-patriotism, anti-whiteism. Just a few of the rogues gallery of ghouls among the top-tier donors. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That is already all you need to know. Microsoft Corporation.
the Ford Foundation, Target. Oh yeah, Target. CBS Corporation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Walt Disney Company, and that's just oh God, this tells you all you need to know just reading this list right here. It wasn't always like this in America.
Taylor, all that what you've just said, right? To the ordinary people, you brought Disney and we know about that. Why is that so pertinent? What are Disney doing to people through the merchandising, through their films, through their motions? Because it's not just Disney. We're seeing it from all of Hollywood. We're seeing it through the entire entertainment systems. How can you show that is true in people's lives? How could you point to that, pal?
Well, starting with Disney, actually, no, you know what? Let's just actually, yeah, I'll talk about Disney first. Disney, after Walt Disney passed away in '65, the Disney Corporation started to become more and more woke as the decades went on, and it started to push, and because it came under the control of the usual suspects, the globalists, the cabal, etc. And they were, and what they would do is they would push these agendas of, well, first of all, I would say up until the new millennium, I would say, like up through like the 80s, maybe they pushed some nice, good content. But then up in the 2000s onward, they've really been pushing this hardcore LGBT and anti-white agenda, where everything has to portray whites as weak and blacks as strong. And the best example of this, or the most infamous example of this, is when they acquired Star Wars and they made the sequel trilogy, Episodes 7, 8, and 9, which are universally known as the worst pieces of the entire Star Wars franchise, and it makes people even look back at the prequel trilogy with fondness. That says a lot, with just how much they push this agenda of having this new female character come onto the scene because she's a woman, and having her be strong and independent and not needing no man to help her, etc., etc. They also, what they would also do is, again, with pushing blacks as the competent figures, where they would have, let's say, for example, you take a situation, I can't think of a TV show by name that did this, but let's take a situation where you have a white man, right, who comes home, he's all drunk, he's dumb, he's talking gibberish, and then you have, let's say, the black wife, because you have to have those. That's another example. The race mixing, and you have the black wife who's really smart and who's really calm and collected and who knows what she's talking about. Meanwhile, the white man, or even the white woman in some cases, they're always portrayed as incompetent. And this is a theme that's gone throughout Hollywood for the last few decades. And the thing is that they the push for this agenda, obviously, it really started after the 60s, when we had the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, where they would push it slowly but surely. If you look over the decades and just look at the themes of these movies, and you start to notice them. Now, they can't be too overtly communistic about it, obviously. But the thing is that if you just look at them and you notice the themes, the characters, you see, and the agendas being pushed, rather subtle, even if it's subtly, you see these far leftist, or even in some cases communist agendas being pushed. Like, say, for example, you'll have a show. I forget what that one show was. It was back in the 70s, where this one man, he was a huge fan of Richard Nixon. It was a character who was a huge fan of Richard Nixon, and then he was known as like the joke character, like always the conspiracy theorist. He's the nutter. Meanwhile, everyone else who's into the far leftist stuff, they would. Is it All in the Family? It might be All in the Family I'm thinking of, but it's one of those shows. My point is, though, is that Hollywood has been doing this throughout the decades, and if you want no, first of all, if you want proof, just go watch the movies yourself. And second, just look at the interviews from actors, script writers, etc. And that's not even going into the child trafficking and all the and molestation and all that stuff that goes on there too. That's not even counting on any of that. So this really is a problem. This is a big problem with Hollywood in general, and it's really culminated in the last decade or so with the woke agenda, which was always planned, because you have to get people accustomed to it, and then you pull out the big guns when you feel that they're ready, boiling the frog, as they say. I will say, however, and that's where the real start of all this came from, and it'll be I want to read this part first before I say that. It wasn't always like this in America. There was a time, ironically, much closer to the days of slavery, when the newly freed blacks, as well as a subsequent generation or two to follow, had that positive attitude which Trump alluded to. Toward the end of the 1800s, until his death in 1915, the accepted and respected leader of Black America was a conservative Republican named Booker T. Washington, whose optimistic message of American patriotism and Christian virtue were so contrary to the nefarious schemes of the Jewish cabal that they set up in 1909, a communist front group, the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. In order to counter and undermine Booker T's message, the cabal's agenda has always involved the incitement of blacks against whites in a divide and conquer scheme still evident today in the ugly museum which Trump is now targeting. We close it with a few words of wisdom from that righteous Negro, Booker T. Washington. Quote, "There is another class of colored people who make a business of keeping the troubles, the wrongs, and the hardships of the Negro race up before the public. Having learned that they are able to make a living out of their troubles, they have grown into the settled habit of advertising their wrongs, partly because they want sympathy and partly because it pays. Some of these people do not want the Negro to lose his grievances because they do not want to lose their jobs. Race problem solvers who don't want the patient to get well, because as long as the disease holds out, they have not only an easy means of making a living, but also an easy medium through which to make themselves prominent before the public. Of all forms of slavery, there is none that is so harmful and degrading as that form of slavery which tempts one human being to hate another by reason of his race or color. One man cannot hold another man down in the ditch without remaining down in the ditch with him. Think about it. We went into slavery pagans. We came out Christians. We went into slavery pieces of property. We came out American citizens. We went into slavery with chains clanking about our wrists. We came out with the American ballot in our hands." End quote. And that's a very good speech, Booker T. Washington. Tell it, Booker, tell it. And then here, founder, just some people here. The Jewish mafia conspirators such as Jacob Schiff and the Red Rabbi Stephen Wise created and controlled the NAACP for their war against whites. Communist atheist W.E. Du Bois was the black face used to front for the Jewish-funded cabal. Patriotic Christian Booker T. Washington saw through Du Bois' game, but probably not the higher purpose of it. And going back to the to the theme of Hollywood, I should say that Hollywood, in and of itself, was founded by mostly Jewish immigrants that were the children of the Jewish immigrants that came in through in the 1880s and 1890s, after Jacob Schiff convinced President Grover Cleveland to open up the floodgates for Eastern and Southern Europe immigrants to come over. Their kids studied really hard, and they got into the professions, and they created Hollywood. And right out of the gate, you had they were already trying to subvert the culture, and they got into huge physical wars with Thomas Edison over trying to take his technology and pervert it for their own purposes. And this so Hollywood, right from the very beginning, if you go back over its history, it's known even in mainstream circles that Hollywood was Jewish founded, and that all of the heads of the big corporations that formed out of Hollywood all were Jewish as well, whether it be the Warner Brothers, MGM Goldman, etc., etc. The only one that wasn't was Walt Disney. And as I said before, after Walt passed away, while Disney has been slowly going down ever since then. And that's just the thing, is that when you have Hollywood doing its thing, the rest of the American and Western market entertainment industry is going to try to follow suit, because they feel that if the big Hollywood directors are doing it, then that must mean that's exactly what's going to make the most money. Some of them do it for nefarious purposes, and others do it just because it's what they think what makes money. That's what happened these last 4 years with all the big companies like Walmart, Petco, Target, and etc. They were hardcore pushing this rainbow flag agenda because they thought it was going to make them money. But now they've pushed back against it because they realized that maybe appealing to the far left is not a good idea. Appealing to these hardcore radicals is not a smart idea. So I know it's a long-winded answer, but that's in essence, if you really want to get down to the essence of what Hollywood is, first of all, you need to go back to the roots, look at its foundation, look at the people who founded it, as well as their progression over the decades and over the last century, really.
The chat room indicates that you're talking about Jews.
I am, or should I say the Khazarian mafia, the fake Jews, whatever you want to call them. I just use Jew.
Exactly. Do you know what? That's exactly what it is, mate. These aren't Jews. These are people who claim to be Jews.
Yeah,
that's
I just use
what we're
Jews
up against. That's exactly what we're up against here, mate. So
you know what? But yeah,
I get what you're saying, because you can't take away from the fact that the people that are in these places, at the very least, claim to be Jewish. At the very least. So when you put these things together, you can't help but see it. And it's very strange. It's very strange to have people reacting and shouting at you, not you in particular, Taylor, about being anti-Semitic and stuff like that. It's just that these people aren't Semitic. These people are European. Well, that means they are, by definition, not Semitic. So we've got to grow up. And as I said before I forget who I responded to in the chat room, we've got to grow some balls and stand up. It's not about standing up against other people. It's not about standing up against races or religions. It's about standing up for what is true. That's why me and Alex always, and we are always going to go back to the best English version of the Bible that we can find. And the best English version can be found by using a lexicon and a dictionary. So simple, takes a bit of time, but it's really worth it. Because the stuff that I learn from people isn't quite true. So I think bringing this questioning that you do, Taylor, is imperative. The factor is we do have to balance this. The Jews, in speech marks, running Hollywood are not Semitic necessarily.
Yeah,
and because they're dual citizens with Israel, and we're told that Israel is God's people, we put them all in the same basket. That's not true. There are people who are of Israel, who are God's people, and they live in the region of Israel. But that is not the government. That's not the government that's running this. So we do have to differentiate that.
The funny thing is that Israel was original. The Israel that we know today, it was originally going to. First of all, it's Rothschild's creation. He funded it, and it was originally going to be called the Land of Zion, but then they changed it to Israel for them to be able to get all the evangelicals on board. So there's that, and also the thing is that what did Jesus have to say about the Jews? That's a good question. What did Jesus have to say about them?
Well, I got a parable I can share if you give me 1 second to queue it up.
All right. Because if I remember correctly, he had some very not positive things to say about them. like taking out that, like making a, like fashioning a whip and smacking them.
Yeah. Okay. So here we go. It's in Matthew 21. Let me get the full chapter up so I can read it all out. Sorry, my computer's running really slow.
I know the feeling. I know that feeling.
Okay. So we're going to pick this up, Matthew 21, verse 33. Here another parable. There was a certain householder which planted a vineyard and hedged it about, and digged a winepress in it, and built a tower, and let it out to husbandmen, and went into a far country. And when the time of the fruit drew near, he sent his servants to the husbandmen, that they might receive the fruits of it. And the husbandman took his servants, and beat one, and killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did unto them likewise. But last of all he sent unto them his son, saying, They will receive my son. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize of his inheritance. And they caught him, and cast him out of the vineyard, and slew him. When the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what will he do unto those husbandmen? They say unto them, and this being the Pharisees, He will miserably destroy those wicked men, and will out of his vineyard, and will let out his vineyard unto other husbandmen, which will render him the fruits in their season. Jesus said unto them, Did ye never read the scriptures? The stone which the builder rejected, the same is become the head of the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in your eyes. Therefore say I unto you, the kingdom of God shall be taken from you, and given to a nation, bringing forth the fruits thereof. And whosoever shall fall on this stone shall be broken, but on whomsoever it shall fall, it will grind him to powder. And when the chief priests and Pharisees had heard his parable, they perceived that he spake of them. But when they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the multitude, because they took him for a prophet. So what Jesus did was he gave this parable here of a rich man who had a vineyard. He lent it out to some guys to take care of it. He tried to get the fruits of his labor, of his vineyard, his cut, and they killed his servants. And he kept sending servants, and they kept killing them. And then he sent his son, and they killed his son too. And Jesus asked these Pharisees, like, what would you do in this situation? Pharisees answered honestly, well, that he would utterly destroy those husbandmen and let out the land to people who would actually take care of it and render him the fruits, or his cut of his property. So this parable that Jesus gave is essentially what happened throughout Jewish history, dating back to the time of the prophets. The prophets would come and would prophesy against Israel. They wouldn't turn their ear to the prophets. They wouldn't listen. They killed some of the prophets. Jesus himself said Zechariah was slew at the altar. So Jesus literally told them, like, you guys are going to kill the son of the husbandman, which is me, and the kingdom of heaven is no longer going to be with you, but with a nation that will bring forth the fruit. What is that nation? It's the kingdom of God, the Christians. So we go to Romans 9:6-7. This is Paul writing. For they are not all Israel, which are of Israel, neither because they are the seed of Abraham are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. So just because they claim to be children of Israel doesn't mean that they are actually children of Israel. The child of Israel is Christ Jesus, and in him we put our faith. And then if we go into like Galatians 3:28, get this up. Sometimes I think it's easier just to take the Bible off my shelf.
Hey, maybe it is sometimes. Oh, speaking of the Bible, I just want to throw this in real quick. Do you guys know what a Game Boy is? The original Game Boy?
Yep.
Do you know that there's a game cartridge that you put in your Game Boy? It's literally just the Bible. You just read the Bible.
Oh, that's cool.
That was so cool. And I was like, yo, that is awesome.
That is right up there with my level of nerdiness, and yeah.
I wonder if you could get through the whole thing on one set of batteries.
My nerdiness says what version?
Yeah, is the Game Boy Color or the original Game Boy?
The original Game Boy.
Original. Nice.
I just wonder if you could read the whole thing in one set of batteries, because you know how those things die really fast.
Yeah, for sure. You need the plugging into the wall for that one. But anyways, in Galatians, Paul picks it up. He says, "For as many of you as been baptized into Christ have put on Christ. Therefore, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither bond nor free, male nor female, for ye are one in Christ Jesus. And if ye be Christ, then ye are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." So once we are baptized into Christ, we then become heirs, descendants of Abraham. So we become a race, creed, ethnicity, all of our own as Christians. We can even go to Romans 3. Let's see if it'll pull it up for me real quick. Let me find a good spot to pick up at, because I really like reading scripture in context instead of just pulling like little bits of it. Let's see.
Oh, to answer your question, Webby, it's the King James version.
Nice. King James is like one of the translations that I really like to use is the base translation, but I also use Christian Standard, English Standard, and then I also have a couple of good ones. So on my shelf, let me grab these down. I have the New Greek English Interlinear New Testament, UBS 5th edition, Nestle Allen 28th edition. So this gives me my Greek and English side by side, so that way I can see the original language right along with the direct word for word translation of it. But then I also have the Septuagint with Apocrypha, which is also a Greek English interlinear version, word for word. So I have the Greek Septuagint, and this also includes like the Apocrypha works, I believe, if I am not mistaken. Yep, this does include the Apocrypha. So I got a bunch of different scriptures that I like to work, or a bunch of different writings that I like to work with to try to get as close to the original language as possible. But also in Romans 2:28-29, Paul writes of the Christians, "For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart and the spirit, and not of the letter, whose praise is not of God, but of men." So we are made so based on like Paul's writings, we become heirs of Abraham through the seed, which is Christ Jesus. So even though they can claim that they're Jews and that they're keeping their covenant, Hebrews makes it clear that covenant is waxed old and is ready to pass away. So they need to get on board with the new covenant. So, I mean, that's how I approach apologetics with Jews. I try to show them that, you know, the covenant that was established with Moses, it was temporary. It was added not because of righteousness, but for transgressions. The law wasn't given to Israel at Sinai because they were good people. It was given to them because they had transgressed God and built a golden calf. And that's where all those laws came into place. At first, they only had 10. But then God added, like, okay, well, we're going to add 603 more onto these people because they can't keep their act together.
Yeah, and you know, he didn't really appreciate the money lenders, as I'm sure you knew.
Yeah, for sure. And Paul tells us it was just a schoolmaster. It was just a teacher until righteousness came. But then also he writes in 1 Timothy in regards to the law. But we know that the law is good if a man uses it lawfully. I'm picking up at 1 Timothy 1:8. Knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly and for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind, for men stealers, for liars, for perjurous persons, and if there be any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine, according to the glorious gospel of the blessed God, which was committed to my trust. So the Mosaic law is not for the righteous, but we are made righteous through Christ. So therefore, we are not under the law, but we are under grace. And we can get into a whole spiel about that. But the legitimacy of somebody's Jewishness is really hard to determine because, like, after the Roman Jewish Wars, there was the dispersal of the Jews among Europe and stuff, and they lost a lot of their ancestral roots. Like, it's hard to trace them back to the Second Temple era. So, and that's why they can't figure out who's Levites today. But yeah, it's difficult. And the only covenant that really matters these days is the covenant established in Jesus Christ. So anybody that's not in Christ is outside of Christ, and I feel bad for them and pray for their souls that they wake up and see who their Lord and Savior is before it's too late. As Spurgeon said, it's good to come to Christ when he's covered in his own blood instead of being kneeled before him while he's covered in yours, because that's the ultimate reality. Revelation 19:11.
Yeah. And, the whole thing, so they pretty much been responsible for this whole thing. I mean, they were in charge of the slave trade too. Like, they're the ones making money, moving the blacks and other slaves across the ocean, from Africa to Europe to the Americas, etc. So, people want to talk about slavery. Going back to what I was saying, to the article I just finished about the blacks, is that people always just people don't even know that whites were the white European were the last ones to adopt the idea of slavery, and they were also the first ones to abolish it. So at the end of the day, these people, these far lefties, like these TikToker far lefties, are just I don't know what to say about them other than the fact that their brainwashing, I think, might be a little too far to be fixed. Because at least some of them, because they will go and say stupid, pardon my French, stupid shit. That I'm saying that if you don't give us, like, I saw this one clip of this one black woman who was saying, if you don't give us free food stamps and Section 8, then we're gonna go out and rob and break into stores and and steal stuff. So I'm just like, wow. And this isn't just a one-off thing. A lot of people are falling into this camp, these far lefties, and it's unfortunate. But the good thing is that hopefully that they're pretty much a minority, and their numbers are shrinking less and less every single day, or more and more every single day. And then you have the mainstream media, the controlled left mainstream media, who are pushing these hardcore radical agendas. They're pushing for crime, and they're pushing for soft on crime and open borders and all that stuff. And it's really showing just how it's really showing the public just how radical they are. That's what AOC and the Squad and Zoran Mondami, that's what these people are for. They're there to expose openly the hardcore communistic radicalness of the Democrat Party to the public without any of the fluff and keeping it on the sleeve stuff. Because that's what gets people to understand. It's as Q said, you can't tell the people, you have to show them. And at the end of the day, we're showing them right. They've been shown right now, and for the last several years, just how radical and crazy these people actually are. Especially when they see all these demonstrations on the news of these protesters, of these boomer white liberals who have no clue about who don't even live in areas, and yet they're protesting for ICE to come in, for ICE to not come in, etc. It's a real social experiment, but of the best kind of variety that's going on at the moment. That in order to fix the public that has been indoctrinated for the last so many decades now. I do want to read one more article though, and it's this one I got up on screen right now. And this one is going to be talking about the next generation I brought up before. Editorial by David Brooks: The Rise of Right-Wing Nihilism. As with so many articles and editorials now regularly appearing in the Q York Times, this item by David Brooks, or rather someone purporting to be David Brooks, should be read in the context of the ongoing Q military operation. Anyone who has followed the paper record for as long and as closely as the editorial board of the Anti-New York Times can clearly see that something fundamental has changed at the New York Times. Sleazy, sedacious, dual citizen scum such as Mr. Brooks, cough cough, would never have taken the libtard establishment to task for its crimes and follies. But now, Brooks and others at New York Times do so regularly. And this isn't just the New York Times as well. This is all the mainstream leftist networks. Like, say, for example, you have CNN, and as bad as CNN is, they have been actually showing some very truthful and good information lately. I don't know who the guy's name is. He comes on and he gives the poll numbers of how things currently stand with various statistics, like, say, crime, or people's thoughts on crime, or the border, or the jobs market, or people's thoughts on Israel, the Democrat Party, etc., etc. And it's really showing on obviously a hardcore communist network truths to the public for that audience that watch that network, because your normie libtard will watch stuff like CNN or MSNBC because they believe that's what they're getting their news from. And meanwhile, you also have your so-called academic types, the ones that graduate from places like Harvard and Columbia, etc., that say that think that they're so smart, they watch stuff like PBS and listen to NPR and all that stuff. So, different strokes for different folks, as they say, giving a different, appealing to every single audience with different varieties of truths in ways that suit the different audiences, because you have to get everyone at the end of the day. But moving on. In this piece, Brooks blames libtard elites for the growing right-wing anger and nihilism, hateful rejection of imposed norms, among America's young people, and he does so in a way that almost seems sympathetic to, but not supportive of, the young, disaffected, and angry nihilists of the right. And he's right. Play on words right there. Whereas young libtards are still the same as libtards of years gone by, many of the young right-wingers of today are becoming really radicalized and are noticing certain things about a certain group. Cough, cough, we know that group. From the article, a conservative in the West today feels drenched by a constant downpour of progressive sermonizing. What would you do in such circumstances? Well, at first, you'd probably grit your teeth and take it while silently seething. An astounding 88% of the students said they pretend to be more progressive than they are in order to succeed academically or socially. More than 80% of the students said they submitted classwork that misrepresented their real views in order to conform to the progressive views of the professor. Other people, of course, don't just cope, they rebel. Some people you just want to watch the world burn. This may be where history is leading. Smothering progressivism produced a populist reaction that eventually descended into a nihilist surge. End quote. Tell it, Brooks, tell it. And here's a headline. The young right are Gen Z turning fascist? Ooh, there's that word, fascist. Generation Z drives far-right support in Europe. A growing marginalized element of our young people have come to really despise the progressive elite establishment, which they properly blame for stealing their future. And many of these kids would prefer to see the world burn rather than have to navigate the madness of what Mr. Brooks refers to here as stifling progressive orthodoxy. That is the essence of the nihilism, which, though much more preferable than libtardism, leads to nowhere but blackpilling. However, if this negative force can be harnessed, controlled, and steered toward the perceived justice against those who have wronged them, It would turn out to be a powerful force for restoration and progress. The combustible raw material is there. If the coming storm can grab a hold of these angry and bitter Zoomer millions, and we are optimistic that it will, then the coming generation might just become a fearsome and formidable force with an uplifting mission instead of just angry black pillars. Depending upon how they are handled and retrained, it could be 1933 all over again. Let's see what happens. And then here's some very interesting stuff right here. Among Gen Z Republicans, support for the shitty little state, that's Israel, now stands at an abysmal 32%, and that's being generous. I've seen some polls that say it's in the 20s, as opposed to 72% for their GOP boomer elders. Hitler AI English translations are very popular on TikTok. I've seen some of them. 21% of Gen Z believes that the Great One, aka Hitler, had some good ideas, according to some polls. So what this article is basically saying is that the new upcoming generations that are in school or are just coming out of school have reached that point where they have seen through, where they have been pushed with this woke agenda for the last 10 or so years, and that's been pushed so hard on them that it's effectively pushed them forcefully to the left. We have so many young people these days who understand that these politicians are nothing more than puppets, and that this wokeism is and slash progressivism is nothing more than a cancer on our society. And because of the rise of social media, with places like YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, etc., it's really gotten people to start asking questions, because no longer are they sitting in front of their TV forced to watch a news anchor like a shill like Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather, etc., etc. Now they can look on podcasts and get their news there, and that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what's happening now, is that people are getting their news from podcasts rather than the mainstream media networks. The only people that watch them now are the hardcore, are the older generations of lefties who still are still addicted to their news television. I mean, just look at people like Joe Rogan, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, etc., etc. These people are pulling in several times the amount of views that even the mainstream media networks pull. And because MSNBC is in the pits, it's so bad that NBC. I'm not sure if you heard about this, but NBC had to ditch them because of how bad that they're pulling in ratings, and they have to change their name from MSNBC to MS Now, or as I like to call them, BS Now. So it's really showing the culture is shifting toward a much better outcome, and it's not perfect. Obviously, there's still some growing room, but at the end of the day, things really have started taking a turn more towards the common sense. And the harder, as I mentioned before, the harder that these lefties, whether it be in the UK or America or Canada, etc., push this nonsensical agenda like censorship bills, or locking people in their locking people up because of something they posted on Twitter or Facebook, the more that stuff like that comes out, whether true or not, ends up pushing these people more and more against the left and more against these radical, nonsensical progressives. And that's the Q operation right now in a nutshell.
Well, all I've seen in the chat room, again, even though you've answered him, Taylor, about Ibrahim Traore, again, I asked you last week, who funded this coup? Me Director doesn't seem to know, or doesn't want to say who funded it. Have you looked into that, like I asked?
I did look. I didn't look into any form of a coup. I did look into his relationship with Trump, and I didn't find anything there. So,
well, that's the issue, isn't it? Who funded the coup? Because that's who's taken over that sector of that country. That is the interesting aspect about this. Me Director doesn't know who funded it.
well,
now he's saying that you and Russ had never heard of him. Well, I only Googled him, and I told you who he was, but he's the youngest leader of this country that took over by a coup. You don't take over a country by a coup without somebody funding it.
Well, yeah, obviously.
If you don't know, and I don't know, and me, director, doesn't know, then we need to stop asking the question, do you know who Ibrahim Traore is? Yes, we do. But why do we know him? What's he doing? Me, director, thinks that Trump, Keir Starmer's sucking Trump off anyway. So it's either Trump and Putin are in fear of this fella in this African country, which is what me, director, seems to intimate, but he doesn't know who funded the coup. That's the interesting aspect. We know somebody's funded a coup, but who is it and why? Is it just to kick the foreigners out and then hold everybody to ransom for those aspects, which is fair enough. As you well know, Hitler did the same. You want our engineers, you want our engineering, you want our manufacturing, you'll pay. And you'll pay in gold. We won't accept made up paper money. So if he is doing that, that's one aspect that we've got to look at. But you can't just keep sitting there and saying, do you know who he is? Tell us, do you know who he is?
Yeah, that's honestly annoying. That
again, it's this to and fro. You can't just sit somewhere and go, nah, tell me this, nah, tell me that. Certainly not what this show is meant to be about. We've seen in the chat room about Christianity and Jews, and yes, Jesus was a Jew. Well, Jesus came for the Jews. He came to tell the Jews, hey, I'm your God. You're not listening to me though. And you know what? My other disciples will go and tell everybody else. And that means that everybody now has a chance to be with Jesus. Now that means Jew and Gentile. So there aren't any Jews or Gentiles, they're all Jews who believe. That's how it works out, that's how it's set out. So we've got to stop this stupidity. Especially when people go, religion. Religion is not relationship. And that's the difference between the Bible, as it's been compiled into the book from the ancient manuscripts. It's about relationship of the individual. Jew, Gentile, it doesn't matter. Do you believe that Jesus is who he said he was and he did what he did and who sent him? If you believe that, you're a Jew. You're part of Israel. That's all that matters. But we get bogged down in the stupidity of all this. So we've got to keep on being honest now. I've liked that the show's been that completely tonight with a lot of great questions, to be fair, in the chat room. We've got 5 minutes left. So Taylor, do you want to sum up and tell us what you're going to bring us for next week? And then we can move on.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'll say that hopefully we'll get even more good stuff this coming week, because Trump has said that. What the hell? I just disappeared. Trump has said that that the National Guard will be deployed, or the military will be deployed to Chicago, Illinois, in order to clean up the crime there, and that he gave a list on Truth Social of the places that he's looking into possibly sending them in order to clean up crime, as well as everything else. And the thing is, it's not just about the crime. If you ask, excuse me, is that the next other component to it, the fifth generational warfare component to it, is that he's getting us used to the idea of needing to call these agencies onto American soil in order to take down these enemies, these traitors, these governors, these mayors, etc., who like Gavin Newsom or Cuomo, or all of these people from these different hardcore blue cities and states, in order to take them down, in which he can optically initiate the Insurrection Act, which is one thing that we've been waiting for, because then once that happens, everything's off the table then, because that is when you can openly lock up these mayors and these governors who are fighting back against ICE and fighting back against cleaning up crime. People like what's that woman, the mayor of LA? I forget her name. That black bitch.
Whoa!
I forget her name. You should know who I mean, though. Just just fighting back against the saying, this is a sanctuary city, this is a city of immigrants, yada yada yada. But yeah, I should also say, before I finish up, I started to upload stuff to my YouTube channel again, because I'm taking a chance, because it's been a bit now. I'm trying not to upload anything that's too much, because I don't want to get taken down again. And also, I'm gonna put my channel in the chat, my YouTube channel, and I would like also, if people were to go to the website that I like to use, realnewsandhistory.com, sign up for the man's newsletter. That shit is really, really good, and maybe pay for the PDF package, because that there are some really damn good books, many of which I've already read on my channel, and I'm currently reading about different topics, whether it be Napoleon, World War II, World War I, COVID, 9/11, the Civil War, etc., etc. And there's a damn good-ass video series, too, that you should check out, too, that is like a video version of all that goes into some detail with illustrations and receipts and everything. So you won't be able to sit there and say, oh, how does he know all this? Where's the proof? Well, the proofs are all provided. It's just a matter of you just going and looking at them to see for yourself. So I would say do that, and because I've learned a lot myself from these sources. So there's that.
Good stuff, mate. Like I said, all the links that you want, put in the chats. Put in the chats afterwards. You can fit the links in, or fit your comments in to point to links. So we can get this going every week, because there's no point you answering a question about Abraham Traore and then we're still getting the same question. So
yeah, it's just one ear and out the other for some people. It's so damn annoying.
Right, well, as far as we're concerned, still, even for me, I've not had a chance this week. Alex will confirm that I've not really had much of a mind for this week. But to see that this man has been funded in a coup. Hitler was funded. We know who funded Hitler. We know who funded the Bolsheviks. So we need to know who funds this man if he's making a big impression. So thanks for your input, Taylor. Anything you need to post in the description that you can't, send to me through email and I'll post it for you. If not, I'll see you next week, brother.
All right, I'll send you some stuff through links.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
God bless.
God bless. See you guys next time.
Bye-bye, mate. Russ, any final scriptures for us before Alex gives his summing up, before he dives into his bed and his cave for the week? What have you got for us, Russ?
Absolutely. I'm going to pick it right up at Romans 10:1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. For I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. For they, being ignorant of God's righteousness, and going about to establish their own righteousness, have not submitted themselves unto the righteousness of God. For Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to every one that believeth. For Moses describeth the righteousness which is of the law, that the man which doeth those things shall live by them. But the righteousness which is of faith speaketh of this wise, say not in thine heart, who shall ascend into heaven, that is, to bring Christ down from above, or who shall descend into the deep, that is, to bring Christ up again from the dead. But what saith it? The word is nigh thee, even in thy mouth and in thy heart, that is, the word of faith which we preach, that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. For which the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the scripture saith, whoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. For there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek, for the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon him. For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved.
Amen. Amen.
And I figured that was a very fitting closing verse, especially with the topic of who's real Jews and who's not. So
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We need to stop this. Well, Jesus was a Jew and he only came for the Jews, which he did say, but he also said, yeah, it's not just open to you lot though. You lot rejected me. That's why I'm here. I'm come to deal with you, but I'm going to deal with the rest in a different way. And I think when we hold that with an open heart, and our foundation is the scriptures and the gospel, I don't think we're going to go too far wrong. And I think that, the comments, not only what we've got in the chat room tonight, we've been some good conversations. I think what we're seeing is we're seeing a turn to people who are looking. They are searching for something. And I don't think that they're finding it in all the old places. And I think something like this little show is just enough to try and put a bit of a spark in between people. So thanks again, Russ, for your time, mate. Like I said, Taylor, any stuff that you want to post in the description box, if you can't post it in the link, send it to me and I'll put it in the description box so we can send them to places where you want to link to what we've discussed, so we can get this going. I mean, I already think we're on the road anyway. It's been a real pleasure. It's been tough. It's been a tough world. It's been a tough few weeks. Alex will back me up on that one. It's been a tough few weeks for us, but we're all going to the right place, Russ. So thanks again for your time, mate. I appreciate it. I'll send you the link for next week.
Awesome. Sounds good. Y'all have a great week. God bless.
You too, brother. I'll be in touch. Take care, Russ. God bless.
Sounds good.
Mr. Weaver, that's a perfect tash that you've got. I didn't actually notice the little, not sarcastic. What was the word? It was a little grimace, little top up on the tash. Little top up on the tash. And I do get comments, that they wonder why we're not on camera enough. And, I fall to the fact that we've had no technical issues tonight. So, thumbs up to that. In summing up, Alex, for tonight, I know you've not really, you've been listening like I have for most of it and looking in the chat room. How would you sum up tonight and what we move forward to for next week?
Well, I suppose I'll recap the way I see it, try and plot a path through some of the things that have been discussed. If you think about land rights, which is one of the big disputes around the ancient Near East and what's described as Palestine and Israel and the whole thing about states, which is a relatively modern construction. When we encounter the debate, people don't familiarize themselves with the history. They're not theologically aware either. So they just take sides very superficially, and that usually leads to confirmation bias, that they've already got a fixed view that they got from somewhere that they didn't really examine, and they just cling to it like a raft in the rapids approaching a waterfall. But if you think about land rights and you connect it with ethnicity, and then you connect ethnicity with genetics, and then you bring in the religious factors, and then you think about God, quite apart from the religious factors. A lot of the stuff where, for example, Taylor talks about Jews, and he quotes that same thing every week, where the person describes it as the shitty little state. You can see, that's very double-edged, because the ideology is laced all the way through the presentation. So what that actually does, it just gives leverage for those people who want to portray that in a particular way. It's saying, well, look, the evidence is there.
Very narrow-minded, isn't it?
This is anti-Semitic. So to be honest, all that kind of polemic, it doesn't really serve any purpose. It's counterproductive. So the thing is, when you look at land rights, and when you look at ethnicity, genetics, religion, a lot of the stuff where Jesus was, you could say, maybe in a critical mode, he was criticizing the religious establishment, and not Jews per se. And through the whole of the Old Testament, the unfaithfulness of the people, you could argue that the top representative is the king, a bit like Keir Starmer is the one who's pushing policy in the direction of this country. We aren't. Largely, our opinions are ignored. So kings and others in positions of influence in Israel may be much more corrupt. And of course, the prophet spoke about the false or deceptive shepherds, the ones who led the people astray. So it does seem as if power bases existed even within Jewish nationalistic understanding grounded within the land. There were power structures and hierarchies, and power structures and hierarchies have always been part of the problem. So, and this is part of what Jesus came to remedy. So when you look at the religious aspect, and then you look at God, and in relation to land rights, well, if you look specifically at Jesus in John 4, the woman of Samaria, the woman at the well, when he said, "A time is coming and now is when the true worshippers will worship God in spirit and in truth." Therefore, not geographically, not based on a temple geography, not with the Holy of Holies, holy place, court of the men, court of the women, court of the Gentiles, concentric circles of holiness, that there was in the land of Israel, their conceptuality was geographical holiness. And Jesus fundamentally critiqued that, but he did say to the Samaritan woman, "You think salvation's from this mountain." Well, really, it does come from the Jews. In other words, there was that ethnic dimension at the time because God chose that particular.
Because they were the only ones getting the truth. That is why the truth dropped onto the Jews' table and the crumbs dropped underneath. That's exactly what she was saying.
They were getting the revelation. I mean, I would say that the other cultures that have no connection with Israel, Aboriginal, otherwise, God gave his truth through general revelation, through nature. The signs are obvious that Romans 1 speaks exclusively about how God revealed this to man's conscience through the signs of nature. But the revelation specifically was through the Jews, which we talk about as salvation history. But obviously, therefore, they were a specially appointed people, but they weren't a special people because they were Jewish, because they were genetically Jewish, because they were ethnically Jewish. Because if you start going down that path, then you get into this whole Ashkenazi thing and what is a Jew, which leads nowhere. Or if you get into the land rights defined as geographical holiness, it gets you nowhere. So if you look at, what Jesus said to the woman of Samaria, ultimately it's going to transcend geography, although within culture and history there was a specially appointed people, but not for nationalism as zeal and superiority and ego. So all those things have to be clarified. They're not particularly difficult to clarify. So that's one part of it. The other part of it, really, in terms of biblical theology, is if you look at how people become aware, in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve partook of the forbidden fruit, their eyes were opened. Now, you can talk about shifts of perspective in Gestalt therapy, based on the work of Fritz Perls and the empty chair. It's a radical change of outlook. Now, with the fall, this was something that just happened spontaneously. Their eyes were opened. Now, if you look at what happens with the Apostle Paul, he's blinded. Something like scales falls from his eyes, very symbolic. He wasn't able to see before. There were scales covering his eyes. The Pharisees and Sadducees didn't receive the baptism of John. And because they didn't receive the baptism of John, the gospel description of that was they weren't able to recognize Jesus. So there were prescribed rituals, and people realized that if some prophet-like looking person like John the Baptist was in the wilderness crying out, offering baptism, which was clearly about renewal, it's a refreshing perspective. Ultimately the people wanted the blessing, but they didn't want the change of perspective. So again, there needs to be a perspective shift in order to see properly. So what starts at the fall is we get a distorted perspective. There's a wedge, there's a block, we can't see straight. It's like we've got misty vision. Then, of course, the Jews became ethno-nationalistic, land-based, holiness and piety based on geographical principles. Jesus corrected that. So the true worshippers in future will worship God in spirit and in truth. It's an internal condition based on being renewed, repenting, coming to God and his spirit dwelling within you. So it's a totally different perspective, no longer geographical, affected through Jesus. And then, of course, the Apostle Paul still persecuting. Something like scales falls from his eyes after he's spoken to, convicted, and he has to understand in this blindness a few things, has to be led by the hand, and eventually God removes the scales from his eyes, then he can see clearly. So there are many ways. So again, if the religious leaders were described by John the Baptist as a brood of vipers, they had false agendas, false reasons for wanting to be associated with John. They weren't sincere seekers, and they weren't ultimately, those who didn't receive the baptism of John, able to recognize Christ, because they had basically perspectives and outlooks that were tainted by the Jewish nationalistic frame. We're better, we're special holy people, we're descended from Abraham, we're important, God chose us because we're important, which the Lord made very clear. You were not chosen because you're special or important. Quite the opposite. It's so God could reveal his glory through Israel. It wasn't about their glory. It wasn't about their importance. It was about them being a fitting vessel so God could reveal himself to the world. So they twisted it. And that's what a distorted perspective does. So what I think I'm saying in conclusion, really, to sum it all up, is all these perspectives that people take, if they're ethnic, land rights based, ethically based, liberal, humanitarian, all based on my skewed perspective, and they're not informed by that shift, those scales falling from the eyes. People won't see straight. They won't recognize Christ. They won't recognize what the message was about, and they'll just see Christianity as a religion like every other religion, and then they'll just be arguing with each other and going, well, that doctrine's right, that doctrine's wrong, this is correct, that's not correct. And he'll not get anywhere unless people have that revelation to their heart, so that these scales fall from their eyes. They won't be able to see straight. They'll be trapped in mentalities which are war-based, conflict-based, carnal, flesh-based, ego-based, and that's ultimately the long and short of it.
And that's why we were given over to this based mindset.
Yeah.
That you've got to be able to discern the difference between this. And it's not an argument over Jesus is a Jew or Jesus is this. Jesus came to tell the Jews because, believe it or not, God, which is Jesus, chose a certain sect of people to be different to the others. Why? Because they were meant to be an example. That example was poor because they all went against God, but God never gave up on them. And that is why then the Gentiles are brought in. So knobheads like me and you who didn't know God because we weren't part of that sect had the chance. And when that chance is presented, Alex, it's presented in a certain way. It wasn't presented to me by some bloke who said this is who you should believe, because I'd have said, well, why? well, because of this. Well, why that? And I had those questions. So when I was born again in 2017 and I had that encounter, I had those questions. And those questions were very quickly answered, as in, show me were this book, were these scriptures, show me where they agree with any religion that you've heard of. And I'd heard of a few, and I'd gone through a few. I'd been inducted into Taoism. I'd sat through many a left footer and right footer service, and all of a sudden I just went, this Bible goes against everything. It goes against Islam, it goes against JWs, Mormons, C of E, Roman Catholicism. It goes against everything. And they went, and it was just like, well, why can't you believe it then? And we're programmed to not just believe, but I was programmed also to ask questions. And when those questions leave you with this big wide open gate and nobody says, yeah, that's not true, but don't go in there, that doesn't work for me, that, Alex. So I think what we'll do is we'll take the information that we've taken so far this week. We'll watch what happens this week, because we've got painted islands with St George's cross on them. We've got flags flying out of private properties around my local area as well. We'll see how much they want to clamp down locally. I can see what's happening nationally. Let's see how they're going to clamp down locally, and then we'll take it from there. But all in all, mate, I think we're in for another fruitful week for the podcast. I don't see it dropping anywhere. I'd like to thank everybody who's been in the chat room. There's been some good chat going on there tonight. I'd like to thank everybody who's contacted me through the week and sent messages. The ones who included why me and Alex aren't always on camera. It's just down to technical issues, being honest. We're trying to keep this going and not lose track, as in people getting bored with it. The people who are watching it, I get really good feedback from. If I could ask some things, is to like it, subscribe if you haven't, but share it. Even if you disagree with it, share it with people. Because the one thing that me and Alex want this show to come back to is, why do you believe what you believe? We believe what we believe because we'll tell you. So you come and tell us, God is love, that's great. Why is God just love? Is he more? Tell us more about what you want to say. Come on the show. Text me, email me. Come on the show. Don't just sit in the chat room and say things, or hide in the chat room. Come and say things. Come and see us, because we want the truth. You know, me and Alex aren't here saying we know everything. Me and Alex are sitting here saying this is our foundation. Everything goes against this foundation, yet it's still standing. So this is the rock that me and Alex will stand on.
I just had an idea. You know, I was talking earlier about the difference between planned social order and spontaneous social order. Well, all these St. George crosses that have been appearing on roundabouts as well after the flags were taken down. Of course, some of the leftist idiots have been painting over the top of them like love, not hate, because obviously they're retarded. And there's not much we can do about that. It just is a good example of how the programmed idiots just do reflex actions and believe that anything where we're standing up must be shut down immediately. But I realise that if you go on a protest, as you said many a time, people have to plan to come together, so it's like a planned social order. But I was thinking about the St. George flag, not even the Union Jack, because I'm not sure really whether it's appropriate to believe in the Union. It's hard to say. But the St. George flag, of course, has got a red cross on a white background, and white represents purity. A cross that's red, which represents blood. Now, if you think of the Passover lamb and inscribing on the lintels and the doorposts and so on and so forth, the angel of the Lord passes over. I'm not saying it's the same. But if someone who might be classed as a Christian nationalist who's English, if they just ordered a flag, didn't go on a protest, didn't go to some place that was a planned social order, just thought, I'm going to make my statement, I'm going to get a St. George flag and I'm going to put it in my bedroom window. Now, that in itself, you could see how that could be considered nationalistic, but not in an offensive way, just a statement. And where the red cross on the white background, blood, on the cross, on a background of white purity, could be a statement, not just for an English nationalist, but for a Christian to say, well, actually, this is what it means for me as well. It's not just a flag of England. It's a statement for me about Jesus in my bedroom window. And if lots of people spontaneously did that, there wouldn't be any protests out on the streets. There'd just be maybe millions upon millions of people saying, we, in this country at least, are English. We're in England. And we're just making that statement. In the privacy of our own homes, everybody driving by can see that. If you saw flags everywhere in people's windows, that would be like a spontaneous thing. You wouldn't plan it, but you can imagine it catching on like wildfire.
I agree. I mean, all we can do is live through what we are seeing and what is going through. I know my local area now is being impacted with St George's flags, so the energy that's sweeping through this nation is spreading to people to know there's something wrong, and they're expressing themselves by putting a flag out. But then you'll still speak to them people, Alex, and say, but you shouldn't pay for your gas, water and electric. And they'll still rebel against that. So I think there's a long way to go, but we've got to start somewhere, and we've got to find things to stand under. And I just, I can't go back to the stupidity that I had. And it was stupidity because I actually knew certain things, but when you learn how they all fit together, you can't then stand under that same umbrella. So I had to step out from that, and that is what puts the target on you. That is what changes things. My local environment is changing, and it's not what it was when I was a kid. Certainly not what it was 20 years ago. So we've got to grow up, and we've got to be able to speak about things. And we say this every week, but we've got to be able to come together and debate this stuff in an articulate kind of way, not setting fire to things, not getting upset and calling people names, but listening. And if you can't do that, then I think the problem's with you. So I'd like to thank you to everybody in the chat room again. Those of you that are going to watch this afterwards, please share, please like, and let's see if we can change these algorithms, because we are trying to get truth out there at the end of the day. It's not just about having a moan every week, even though we like moaning every week. It's not just about that. It's about trying to help your neighbour, the ones that you don't know. Let's try and do that. Hopefully see you all next week, guys. Night, God bless.
Cheers, guys.